Welcome back to H360 Health Talk. We're back again with Frank Shane, the founder and CEO of K9 Disaster Relief. Frank, thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
So take me back to that day. 9/11 happens, and does somebody reach out to you? Do you head to ground zero with Nike? How does this all unfold that you find yourself at ground zero working for 9+ months in the aftermath of 9/11?
One morning, really early, I get a knock on my door, and it's a neighbor. And I didn't know her all that well, and she was a teacher in New York City. And she says, "Oh my God, I know you just finished redoing your Jeep. I restored Jeeps, and the top wasn't on. It was a beautiful day." And she said, "Can I ask you a really big favor? I overslept. Could you bring me into New York?" I said, "Yeah, that would be great." And Nike had never been in the Jeep with the top down before. He's used to putting his head out a window. So there, where we go into New York, if you go left, you're going across the George Washington Bridge, and she worked up in the 80s. If you go right, you're going to go through the Lincoln Tunnel and go downtown. Yeah. So we almost got to the split, and she says, no, go to the right. I said, okay. She had started a new program down right next to the World Trade Center. That was the beginning of Nike's work. He wasn't trained in search and rescue. He was between jobs. He had no vest on or anything. He just thought it was great. He didn't know at first why he didn't have to put his head out the window, because there was no window. It was just, top. And so we were down there, beautiful day. She got off and went her way. And I decided that I would just go over to the seaport there, right there, because you just had to look at the Hudson, and I really hadn't been down there that much. The rest unfolded, and what happened was we ended up just having people jump in the Jeep and taking them up to what became a triage center up by Chelsea Piers. Of course, there was no, as it turned out, no triage going on. So Nike wasn't credentialed. He wasn't search and rescue. This wasn't therapy. It certainly wasn't trauma. But I couldn't figure out why police officers, when they'd come over and we'd be trying to go back down that way up to a certain point until the other Trade Center went down. The North Tower went down second. And that I thought when they'd come over that they would stop us and turn us around. And sort of I was going, that would be a good thing, and what they were doing is they'd come over and they'd scratch his ears or pet him. There were no communications. It gave them a moment, and I realized much later what was going on. Everybody's world turned upside down.
Absolutely.
It was like an apocalypse, to say the least, and the apocalypse was still unfolding. So for that instant, it gave them an ability to touch something like a live teddy bear.
Right.
And then they'd go on and do their work. So that became Nike's credential, if you will, the next day and the next day.
Tomorrow, Christmas Day, will mark exactly 15 weeks since the attacks. And tonight, we look at one critical group at Ground Zero, the counselors who try to help recovery workers come to grips with their exhaustion, their grief, and their psychological turmoil.
You know, you find sometimes jewelry on a body part or whatever, and it's like, I want to make sure that that gets to that family.
He let me escape for a few minutes. The reality that we were here for, and it was it's very comforting. Very.
When you first saw him, it would always be like you watch everyone's response. It was like magic.
It was, it really hit me as I got off of Route 3 where I started and went down the main street in my hometown, and I saw police on every street and cars. And that's when it hit me of the whole day,
Yeah.
sort of.
Yeah. So now you're taking it all in. You arrive back
The
at
fight
home.
and flight and the adrenaline and
Yeah.
everything else. And then it hits you again. And then I thought about the person that I took down there. Because then it became real.
It becomes real.
So that was the beginning of 260 days on that site. And at first, his credential was him.
Self-credentialed.
Yeah, and a lot of us were self-credentialed.
Sure. Well, nothing like this has ever happened. I mean, where do you go to train for this, right?
You can't.
Right.
But immediately, people now who are very good friends, we call it like a Ground Zero family,
Yeah.
they set up canteen stations that day. The University of Pennsylvania brought their VMAT trucks up to help the dogs, because dogs were coming in for their specific purpose of search and rescue.
Right.
Okay, and that didn't pose a problem, but it posed, well, is he search and rescue? What does he do?
Yeah. So how long were you down there in total?
9
working?
months.
9 months.
Nike is the longest working dog on Ground Zero. All of his boots, his vests, his lanyards, IDs are on the permanent display at the 9/11 Memorial Museum. And the way the museum structured it, they put an area as people are going out of this very emotional. The exhibits and things are either in the South Tower or in the North Tower. And the North Tower has really like the cross that they found there,
Yeah.
the big steel cross, the major components that people would identify with. And some are extremely poignant and heart-wrenching: shoes, mementos, everything. So they put Nike's thing right next to a pew, almost where people are leaving, because just like the work that he did, even at the trauma center and now Ground Zero for 9 months, he had developed a family. And so they wanted to lift people's spirits up, the 9/11 Memorial Museum, so that that's what people would see.
And when you and Nike would go to work every day down there, what was your job?
We didn't have a script, so I sort of took a page without saying it to myself, but in retrospect, like Lil. And there were moments during what we did, I thought about Lil a lot. And that was, don't get too tied down into the procedure or what you should do or what a Nike should do, or you got to just sort of go with it. But and I'm a veteran, and I came from the Vietnam War, and I knew chain of command. That was very important. Know your boundaries, know who to listen to, know how it's changing, and of course we had the environment was just I don't know if you can see this, but this would be a hat that even in October, a canine disaster relief was formalized in October, about October, somewhere in October. So this would be, let's say, a hat, and a day late, well, it would start like this, and a day later it would look like this.
And this is what you were breathing in, you
To
and
say the least.
Nike.
To say the least.
As
And
you were
can't,
doing
a
your
dog
job.
can't wear, because they survive by their scent cone. You can't block that off.
Right.
We began to learn a lot during those first days, and then part of what we found, first of all, we had to not get in the way of the other dogs, to not
Which
interfere.
were there for other purposes.
Yeah, they had a different job, so we had to respect that and not interfere or showboat or let them do their job. But then we found, well, they started to get depressed, the dogs.
The other working dogs.
The working dogs, the FEMA dogs. FEMA came in first. Those people are trained. I mean, my God, the work that they did. But there were there was only one live find. But the dogs are trained to find. And they weren't, so we had to play games, hunt and things like that. So their handlers knew how to do that. But what about the caregiver? What about the handler?
Sure.
Because of a combination of my training and knowing structure, and because of Nike's innate ability to rise up to the challenge, and no, he wasn't a therapy dog, if you will. He was learning and adapting, and people were amazed that how he could, if you will, not only parry himself around the site, which just indescribable, but how he could adapt to the human behavior of the firefighters and the uniformed services and the whole range. He began to understand them. And I thought one day, just like Lil, there was something innate going on where he had a strategic ability to go to certain people and not bother somebody else, because we had respite centers there where we used to go. And,
Yeah. Yep.
so he'd always be, and we'd go in for ourselves, but Nike would always schmooze up to somebody that really needed, as I learned later, that would be the crane operator or somebody in the Timor temporary morgue. Or,
Yeah.
well, you never knew who anybody was because we were all wearing, we used to call
Protective gear, yeah.
Well,
Yep.
Carhartts.
Yep.
Heavy duty, and there was no protocol to respirators or, but Nike learned to adapt to that. And to quickly go back to that 90-10, now my training could kick in because Nike was doing his work, but he now was doing the 10%. He was the transitional object, meaning like a teddy bear. He was the magnet that brought people to me and gave me then the ability to assess people. All your senses as a human being, nothing made any sense. So Nike was able to sort of, when people would see him, and each day they got to know him and trust him. And he became part of the fabric of Ground Zero. And very quickly, they insisted that he get a credential because
Sure.
he was a worker.
Frank, thanks so much for being here. It was great having you on the show, and I look forward to continuing our conversation.
I do too. Thanks for having me.